creative thinking and problem solving. So let's just quickly take a look at what we're going to cover in today's telematic session. So firstly, Mr. Edwards will take us through the types of questions you could expect on this topic. We're going to then be looking at the difference between creative thinking and problem solving. We're going to look at some problem solving steps, and then the ways to create an environment that creates creative thinking or stimulates creative thinking. And then we're going to focus on two techniques of problem solving, which is the Delphi technique and the force field analysis. And then before we look at the consolidation activity at the end, we'll be looking at the benefits of creative thinking. So these are the sections of work we're going to cover today. So let's get straight into it. And Mr. Edwards will take you through the first section of work, which is just the types of questions you could expect on this topic of creative thinking and problem solving. Over to you, Mr. Edwards.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. de Klerk. And good afternoon, grade 12s. Welcome, and hopefully we have a good session today. First and foremost, so we're going to have a look at the types of questions you can expect in your exam. All right, with regards to this section of work. So first and foremost, you'll look at this distinguishing between problem solving and decision making. That's the first thing that we're going to go through, so I won't go too far into that. And then the second one, looking at naming, outlining, or applying the steps in the problem solving from given scenarios. So you'll be given a scenario or a case study, and then you'll have to apply the problem solving steps to that case study. Note the verbs that are being used there: name, outline, and apply. Okay, that will influence how you answer the question. For example, name would be one mark questions that you will receive 1 mark for each of those statements that you've made, whereas outline and apply are slightly higher order questions, so you can expect that. All right, then we move on to identify business challenges from given scenarios and apply the problem-solving techniques to solve business problems. So very similar to the previous one, also based on a case study. Number 4 there, apply creative thinking skills to solve complex business problems. So that would be looking at the different techniques that we are going to be looking at a little bit later, things like the Delphi technique, brainstorming, and that sort of thing. All right, explain the benefits or advantages of creative thinking in the workplace. Just remember, benefits and advantages, those are words that are often interchangeable. So that would be referring to the creative thinking that takes place in the workplace. All right, then we move on to discuss and evaluate the impact. Remember, impact referring to positives or negatives of a situation. All right, so let's discuss the impact of creative thinking or problem solving techniques. Okay, so there you've got the different types of problem solving techniques that we are going to be referring to. As Mr. de Klerk referred to earlier, we're going to be focusing on 2 of those today, but as you can see, there are quite a few techniques that we go through. All right, the second last one there, explain how businesses can apply the above creative thinking, problem-solving techniques in the workplace. So that's a more application type question. So you'd be looking at a middle order to higher order question over there. Again, look at the mark allocation to guide you in that situation. Last one, suggest or recommend ways for businesses to create an environment that promotes creative thinking. Also, have a look at the mark allocation there. With verbs like suggest and recommend, you can expect 2 marks at the end of your statement. All right, so now we're going to move on to the first section that we're going to look at, and that is looking at the difference between problem solving and decision making. Now, the question that can be asked is tabulate the difference between problem solving and decision making, or distinguish or differentiate between the two. Now take note, when you're looking at the table that's been given to us there, the first 2 need to be associated with each other. So they need to be opposites. So let's have a look at the first one. It says decision making, okay, and then problem solving on the right. Firstly, decision making, it is often done by one person or a member of a senior management who makes it authoritarian. So meaning that they make the decision. Whereas on the right-hand side, you can see a problem solving, and you can see how they're associated or they're opposites in the fact that it says problems can be solved by a group. So decision making by one person or a member, whereas problem solving is solved by a group. So you can see how they are opposites there. Then we move on to the next one. It says various alternatives are considered before deciding on the best one. All right, so that's decision making. Whereas problem solving is alternative solutions are generated, identified, and then critically evaluated over there. So it's about generating those alternatives, whereas decision making is actually looking at the alternatives and deciding on the best one. All right. Last point there, decision making. It is part of problem solving cycle, as decisions need to be taken in each step. All right. Whereas problem solving is the process of analyzing a situation to identify strategies to bring about the change. Okay, so decision making is part of problem solving, whereas problem solving is the process itself.
Okay, Mr. Edwards, you mentioned earlier that the learners must look at the mark allocation to help them when they're deciding how many facts to write down. So if you take a look at the number of facts that are under decision making and problem solving, so if we can just show that quickly. Under decision making, you can see there are three facts there. So each of those will be worth 2 marks.
Yeah.
So potentially there could be up to 6 marks for explaining or showing the difference from the decision making aspect, and a further 6 marks for showing under problem solving. So potentially they could ask up to 12, or you could potentially have up to 12 marks here. So for you grade 12, just look at the mark allocation, because that will be your hint. If it is 4 marks, then it's going to be 2 marks for decision making and 2 marks for problem solving. So then you're going to have one of the differences under decision making and one of the differences under problem solving. But again, they need to be linked to each other. So you're speaking about, if you look at the first one, if you're speaking about the one person or a member of senior management making the decision under decision making, then you will talk about the multiple members of a team that could be part of the problem solving process. So then if it's 4 marks, you're only going to mention one of the aspects. If it is 8 marks, you're going to have 2 aspects under decision making and 2 aspects under problem solving, and so on. So let the mark allocation help you to identify how many facts you need to write down, because what happens often is people study the work, they know everything, so they write everything down, and that ends up eating into your time that's available to you. So later on, it puts you under a bit of pressure if you can't finish the exam. So use the mark allocation as your guideline. That's just a little hint to help you with the technique of writing the exam paper. Okay, back to you, Mr. Edwards.
Yep. Now we move on to the problem solving steps, and this is quite a popular question. It's popular within the essay. Often there's an essay type question that's referring to the problem solving steps, and also an application type question. All right, so let's have a look at the 8 steps that are referred to there. Okay, first and foremost, you need to identify the problem. We're going to go through an exercise that's in your module in front of you in a moment or two, where we will put this in order. So as we're going through that, maybe you can answer that in the meantime. All right, so first and foremost, you need to identify the problem. So there's numerous ways in which you can do that. You can ask people that are involved in that situation and see what their points of view are. All right, then we move on to define the problem. And as I said, you're going to be asking different people what they perceive to be the problem in the situation. So they might have different points of view. So at that point, you're going to define what the exact problem is. All right, you can't just go with one person's point of view. Then that is going to come up with a biased aspect. So keep that in mind. Definition of the problem needs to be put in place. Then at that point, you're going to identify possible solutions to the problem, and in that way you can use some of the problem solving techniques that we will talk about in a moment. All right, and the point is to identify a few solutions to a situation or a problem, and then at a later stage in the process you'll decide what is the best alternative there. So on that note, we'll move on to number 4. All right, that is select the most appropriate alternative. So in a group environment, you will discuss the pros and the cons of the different alternatives that you have, and at some point you'll come to a consensus, an agreement, whereby you'll decide what is the best alternative for your current situation. All right, then we move on to actually putting it into place. Okay, so we talk about developing an action plan. And in grade 11, you spoke about a business plan and how you would transform that into an action plan. And that's exactly what you're going to be doing here. In this situation, you'd be talking about things like a work breakdown structure and a Gantt chart, which you would have referred to last year. So hopefully that rings a bell. Okay, then we move on to number 6 over there. Implement the suggested solution. So you're putting it into place. Okay. And you would put all the resources that are required would be needed to be put into place as well. So that's number 6. Then you look at monitoring the implementation. So you need to make sure that everything has been put in place, and you need to be monitoring the success of the solution that you've been put in place, because it's possible that it might not have been the best situation or the best implementation of that solution. Okay, and then lastly, you would evaluate whether that was the most appropriate solution. Okay, you would have a look at what your goals were, what your objectives were right at the beginning, and see if you've actually solved the problem. If that is not the case, that you haven't solved the problem, then you would go back and have a look at the other alternative solutions that you have to your disposal. And I think that was step number 4. So you would go back to that step, and then you would go through the process again. All right, so if you look at your modules, you will see that you have got a question or a table, and it says, arrange the following problem-solving steps in the correct order. Now, so what you needed to do on the right-hand side, you would have put your answers there. So you are just putting the correct number into that situation. This could be a nice question for a match the columns, for example. So let's have a look. Okay, so the first one would be identify the problem. All right, just looking at the previous slide. Then the second one would be defining that problem. Okay, remember getting all those opinions from the stakeholders, all those individuals that are involved. Number 3, okay, number 3 would be identify possible solutions to the problem. Okay, so that's where you're going to be using your different techniques to identify possible solutions. And then the next one would be selecting the most appropriate alternative. So that's the number 4 over there. All right, and then we move on to number 5, developing an action plan, putting something into place. Okay, and from that action plan, you are now going to implement. Okay, that's the bottom one there. You're going to implement the most appropriate or the action plan that you put in place with the suggested solutions, and then you're going to monitor the implementation to make sure that it was effective, and maybe you need to make a couple of changes here and there. Lastly, evaluate the implemented solution. So at that point, you're going to decide whether it was effective. If it wasn't, then at that point, you're going to decide maybe we need to go back to the situation. All right. The next section, we're going to be looking at outlining ways in which a business can create an environment that stimulates or promotes creative thinking. All right, so that's the type of question that you could come across. And again, looking at what Mr. de Klerk had said earlier, use the mark allocation to guide you as to how much information you give. All right, most of the time, a question like this, I would not see a question more than 8 marks here. So if it's outline, all right, you just keep in mind that you'll get the 2 marks at the end of your statement, as opposed to a verb that would be like explain or discuss. Okay, so keep that in mind. So if we're looking at different ways a business can create an environment that stimulates creative thinking, you can emphasize the importance of creative thinking to ensure that all staff know that management want to hear their ideas and their point of view. So encouraging an environment where in ideas and opinions, okay, that's going on to the second point there. Encouraging staff to come up with new ideas and opinions to solutions. Okay, so that would be the first two bullets. Moving on to the third bullet, train staff in innovative techniques, creative problem-solving skills, mind mapping, lateral thinking. Okay, looking at a situation or a problem with a different point of view. Okay, we will talk about in a moment the different techniques that are suggested in order to encourage staff to think creatively and innovatively. Right. Encourage job swaps within an organization, studying how other businesses are doing things. So encouraging job swaps in the sense that people get an idea as to what the other individuals in the workplace are doing. So they get different ideas, different perspectives, which can assist them to solve problems and think creatively. Encourage alternative ways of working or doing things, right? In today's environment, we've got the pandemic, we've got lockdown situations, many people are working from home. These are alternative ways of working, and many businesses are considering it as a better way to work. Things like rent, they don't need to pay rent for offices. So that is a fantastic way to think alternatively, and maybe it's an appropriate way to do things.
That could be used as a nice example as well. If you can research which businesses have decided to rather move from their physical presence to move to an online platform, because a lot of businesses actually can just perform from home.
Yeah.
And a lot of businesses also giving staff the option of saying to them, you can choose to either work from home or work from the office. And we know with the situation with schools, for example, where a lot of time throughout the year, people have had to self-isolate, so parents would have had to be home to look after their children, or the schools closed earlier, so parents would have had to make alternative arrangements. And now having the option of working from home makes it easier as well in some cases where it's possible to work from home. So remember, in an essay question, learners, you are required to have relevant and recent examples. So if you can find businesses that have opted from moving away from the office environment to the work environment, that could be used as a good example with regards to creative thinking in your essay question. So that could give you one of your originality marks for your essay question. I just wanted to throw that in there again for exam technique purposes.
Perfect example, perfect example. And I mean, many businesses are considering it more productive. Their staff are more productive from home. They're able to work from home online. They're able. They don't need to be in traffic in the mornings and so on. So they're actually finding it.
It is quite tricky though, because I know we would have had to work from home at some point, and the work environment changed because now your workplace is also your home. So it's quite challenging sometimes to switch off.
Yeah.
So you'll find that a lot of people just keep on working because there's no work hours anymore.
Yeah.
So it's something we're going to have to learn and adapt to as well as we go on, because we haven't been able to measure the impact of working from home yet. It hasn't been long enough. But it's quite an interesting thing that we're going to look at going forward.
Yep, and it's proving quite appropriate for particular industries that are that can do that. Yeah, so just keep that in mind. Originality marks, guys. Always keep that in mind with regard, particularly with lockdown and COVID-19 and how that's affected businesses. It's a good avenue to get that originality mark in the essay. Right, last bullet there. It says, respond enthusiastically to all ideas and never let anyone feel less important. If a manager or a leader does that, they respond enthusiastically to any sort of idea or contribution from a staff member, then chances are that individual is going to be more inclined to actually give their opinion in future. So it is very useful in that sense. All right, so now let's look at the question that is in your module. Right, so it says, recommend ways businesses can create an environment that promotes creative thinking in the workplace. So that's based on what we've just been through with you. All right, so let's have a look. It says, emphasize the importance of creative thinking to ensure that all staff know that management want to hear their ideas. All right. The next one, it says, encourage staff to come up with new ideas. All right, so that's very, very important as a leader of a business. The next one, it says, train staff in innovative techniques, creative problem solving skills, etc. And that's what we're going to be talking about in the next section. Encourage job swaps. Okay, we referred to that. Very useful if you're wanting to get your staff to see different points of view and consider what other people are doing in the working environment. Number 5, encourage alternative ways of working or doing things. And that's what we were referring to, the working from home situation and how many businesses that's benefited them. And then respond enthusiastically to all ideas and never let anyone feel less important, as I referred to in our previous slide. All right, at this point, I'm going to hand over to Mr. de Klerk to take you through the next section.
Right, grade 12's the next section. We're going to look at some problem-solving techniques rather. These are the list of problem-solving techniques that you would have worked through. We are only going to focus on the first two there, the Delphi technique and the force field analysis. And I just put the others up so that you are aware of the other techniques that you also need to know about. So it's Delphi technique, force field analysis, which we will look at today. Then there's also the nominal group technique, scamper, brainstorming, mind mapping, force combination, and the empty chair technique. So just looking back at the past papers, there has been more focus on the Delphi technique, the force field analysis, and the nominal group technique in terms of the application of the different problem-solving techniques. Okay, but you should be able to distinguish the difference between the different problem-solving techniques that we showed you a few seconds ago. But when it comes to the application, you must make sure that you are able to apply the technique that's used for the Delphi technique, the force field analysis, and the nominal group technique. Okay, there's also a lot of times when people confuse the nominal group technique with the brainstorming session. Okay, there is a subtle difference between that as well. But like I said, we're going to be focusing on the Delphi technique and the force field analysis. Okay, so when we're talking about the Delphi technique, your clue is always the word experts. Okay, because the Delphi technique always involves experts, people who have the knowledge about what's going on in the industry. They are likely to provide the most constructive information that you need in order to solve problems. Okay, but also what's important here is these experts are always going to be working independently of each other, so they're not going to be able to be influenced by each other. Normally when you're working in a group setting, you have a number of people that often work well together and they will tend to side with each other and you are able to influence each other's decisions. Whereas with the Delphi technique, these experts are going to be working independently, so the answer or the responses that you're going to be getting from your participants when using the Delphi technique is going to be independent, so it's going to be less biased and there's not going to be a chance of people influencing each other. So it's quite a reliable technique if you are able to use it successfully. Okay, so when we look at the Delphi technique, what we normally do is we have the problem at the center. So we have this idea or problem that we're trying to solve. So for example, you would have known, or by now you would have known that, that the second term of school ended a week early. That was a decision that had to be made by somebody. Okay? And let's say they applied the Delphi technique. Now, I'm not saying they did apply it. I'm just using it as an example to say that they could possibly have applied the Delphi technique in order to come up with these decisions. The decision to end school 1 week earlier and extend the holiday by 1 week because of the impact that COVID was having on the schools. Okay, so what we would do with the Delphi technique, if we take a look, we'll see that we have the problem at the center. Okay, so the problem's at the center, then we bring in a group of experts. So let's assume that the group of experts in this case are all the people involved with education. So there we have Angie Mochecha, Blade Mzamandi and Debbie Schaefer. Those are people, high-profile people, decision makers within the education field, and we have the president as well. So these people would be regarded as the people who have the most know-how in education and possibly the most know-how in how COVID will impact on education. So these people are going to be left with helping with the problem-solving procedure. So what happens is a questionnaire gets drawn up, and then the experts are then given these questionnaires. So this one questionnaire given to all the experts, but remember we said earlier, these experts are acting independently, so they don't have to be in the same place or in the same building. They can be anywhere in the country, in the province, they as long as they can work remotely as well, they don't have to be in contact with each other or in the same venue to be able to answer this questionnaire. So this questionnaire will be sent to all the experts, and they will independently answer these questionnaires, and they will send the questionnaire back to the business. Okay? Right? Then the business will receive the questionnaires back. They will analyze the results of the questionnaire to see if they can break down the problem a bit more and to see if any solutions are possible, and then they will redesign the questionnaire again. So they will send a second questionnaire that has been redesigned back to the experts, and the experts will then be brought in again and answer the questionnaire again and send the questionnaires back to the business once again, where it will be further analyzed to see if we are able to reach a solution at this point. Now, this procedure is going to continue until the business is satisfied, or until the department is satisfied that they have some sort of solution that will eventually solve the problem. Okay, so grade 12s, what we're looking at there is making sure that you know the important factors about the Delphi technique. It involves experts. So you're bringing experts in who know about the industry, so they will be able to give you the best information about it, and they act independently. So you will send questionnaires to them. They will return the questionnaires to you, remembering because they're acting independently, there's no bias in their answers. They're not able to influence each other. They may not even know who the other participants are, who the other experts are. Okay, so you're getting independent research back, so that you can use that in your problem solving and decision making process. Okay, and this process of sending questionnaires out, getting it back, analyzing the results of the questionnaire happens until you are able to receive or until you're able to make a decision and implement a problem solving, or implement a decision that has been made. And if they use the Delphi technique, then there would have been questionnaires going out, gathering information from the experts, and the experts would have then said that it's best to close the schools 1 week earlier, so that we can have an extended holiday. People are able to isolate at home. There's minimal effects of COVID on the schools. It doesn't impact us as badly, and we can return 3 weeks later and catch up or carry on from where we left off. Okay, so that's an example of how the Delphi technique could be used. And in your booklet, you would have had this fill in the missing word type question as to how we can apply the Delphi technique to solve problems in the workplace. Okay, so firstly, the business must invite a panel of experts to research the complaints from the customers. So your experts is the missing word there. The experts do not have to be in one location, and will be contacted individually. So there you can use, they don't have to be in one location, they don't have to be in one place, they don't have to be in one building. Any word that is indicating that they don't have to be in the same place in order to complete these questionnaires or to be part of the Delphi technique as a problem-solving technique. Then number 3, design a questionnaire consisting of questions on how to improve the quality of their products and distribute it to the panel of experts, or the members that are participating in the Delphi technique as your experts. Request the panel to independently respond to the questionnaires and suggest improvements to the product and return it to the business. Summarize the responses from the experts in a feedback report, and then send the feedback report and a second set of questionnaires to the experts, so that they can continue that process again, so they can get more feedback, and eventually you're able to solve the problem. Okay.
Mr. Clark, if I can just add something over here with regards to the exam situation. Many times this section of work is asked with reference to a scenario or a case study. So you mentioned earlier the keyword experts. If you see that in a scenario or case study, then you know that they're referring to the Delphi technique. And with regards to the whole creative thinking or the problem-solving techniques, it's often referred to in a scenario type question. So keep that in mind. There's those key words, and you'll see with the force field analysis as well, there's key words that come into play that you need to be able to identify.
Yeah, they like to use the question like identify the problem-solving technique and quote a line from the scenario to substantiate or to back up your answer. So then you would say Delphi technique. How do you know that? Most likely they'll say experts were contacted, but the word experts will normally be there, or specialists in the field. So those are the keywords that you would have to look out for. So a good piece of advice there. Okay, grade 12s, we're now going to look at the impact of the Delphi technique on the business. So remember, when they speak about impact, it can be positive impact or advantages, or it can be negative impact or disadvantages as well. So if they just say discuss the impact, then you have a choice. You can either write about advantages, or you can write about disadvantages, or you can write about a combination of both. But again, let the mark allocation guide you as to how many facts you need to consider for that. If it isn't an essay question, it will most likely be between 10 to 12 or 14 marks. If it is in a section B type question, it will likely be between 6 and 8 marks maximum. Definitely won't be more than 8 marks. Okay, so let's look at the impact of the Delphi technique. So it says businesses may use a group of experts without bringing them together. Okay, so that's an example, an advantage, because they will not be able to influence each other's decisions. The experts will give the business clear understanding on how to improve on productivity. Experts may give honest opinion as they do not have direct interest in the business. So that's quite important there. The experts are usually not people that are part of the business. So therefore, what their research says, what their knowledge is, how their advice or the advice they're going to give you, it's not going to be biased because they are not affiliated with the business. If you are affiliated with a business, you will tend to give advice that will be advantageous to the business. But if you are acting independently, there's no bias. So you can be honest. So the feedback the business is getting is honest, and it becomes reliable because there's no bias that is attached to it. Because that's quite a big advantage of having the experts involved in this technique. Then with the disadvantages, right, we look at it is an expensive technique due to the high administration costs. So the administration cost will be the cost involved in getting the questionnaires to the experts, but it will also cost money to get the experts involved. We must remember that people who are experts or specialists often won't do things for free because their time is valuable, right? So if we're going to involve experts, there's a good chance we're actually going to have to be paying the experts as well. So in addition to the administration costs of drawing up the questionnaires, analyzing the questionnaires, sending it out, whether it be via electronic mail or whether it be physical mail, it's going to be quite expensive. It could be a quite expensive technique to use. All right, then the next one, it may be time consuming to analyze the data received from experts, because remember the experts take a lot of time to either fill in the questionnaire, and then you take time to analyze the questionnaire, and then it takes more time to draw up a second or a third or a fourth or however many questionnaires you need to draw up. It can be a time-consuming process. So if you need to solve a problem very quickly, this might not be the best technique to use. But if you have a problem and you have sufficient time to solve it, then this would be a good technique to use, because then you're able to evaluate it thoroughly using the experts. Okay, then the next one, it's going to be not all experts are willing to give input on questionnaires. So sometimes you have experts who are not willing to actually be part of the process. So they might not be willing to give up time, or they might do a rush job and just do it very quickly. So it might not be a very valuable feedback from that particular expert. And then some experts might not have in-depth knowledge on certain topics, because remember, industries change. And I might have been knowledgeable 20 years ago, but the knowledge I have now might not be relevant. Okay, so even though you might still be regarded as an expert, you may not have the relevant information for the problems that we are looking to solve. Okay, grade 12, so that was the Delphi technique. Now we're going to look at the force field analysis as the next technique. So your key here with the force field analysis is you are looking for something that's indicating that you are analyzing pros and cons, or advantages and disadvantages, and weighing those pros and cons against each other. Okay, so with the Delphi technique, your keywords were experts or specialists in the field. With your force field analysis, your clue that you're looking for to identify this technique is that you are weighing up your advantages and disadvantages, or your pros and cons, against each other, and you are using that in your decision-making process. So let's look at the force field analysis. Okay, so normally your first step that you're going to do is you're going to describe the current situation or the problem that you wish to solve. Okay, so before you do anything, you first identify the problem that you want to solve. Then from there, you're going to devise a list of pros and cons, which are regarded to as forces for or forces against. Okay, so that could be another clue that you use. You can either look at the terms advantage, disadvantage, pros and cons, forces for, forces against. Okay, any of those terms used will be an indication that we are using the force field analysis as a problem-solving technique. Okay, so you would normally have your problem at the center, and then next to it you'll have your list of advantages or forces for or pros on the one side, and your list of negatives or disadvantages or forces against on the other side. Okay, so once you've got all your advantages and disadvantages, the next step that you're going to do is you're going to give each of those advantages and disadvantages a rating or a score. Okay, now usually it will be between a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is a weak force, so therefore it doesn't have a big effect on whether it is implemented or not, and 5 is a strong force, so that particular advantage or disadvantage has a big impact on the decision going forward. So you will look at each of the problems that you have identified, or so your pros and cons that you have identified, and you'll allocate a score of between 1 or 5. Now again, this score is going to be relative to who's allocating the score. Okay, so if you are asking a group of people to do this, you're going to say, here's a list, here's the problem at the center, here's a list of pros and cons. Can you please give me an indication as to how you feel each one of these impact on the problem? Is it something we want to implement or something that we don't want to implement? And each person will then give a score that's relative to them. So it might not be that everybody feels the same way about a certain pro or con. Okay, so you will, if you're going to use a group setting to use the force field analysis, then you might want to take an average or a mean between each of the participants in that process. Okay, but you will need to allocate a score or a rating so that you can eventually tally that up. Okay, so once you've added a score rating to each of your positives and negatives, or your forces for and against, you will then add up the total of each of those ratings, and then see whether the forces for outweigh the forces against, or whether the forces against outweigh the forces for, and that will implement your decision-making process. Okay, and I'll show you a little bit a quick example after this as well. And then you'll choose the force with the highest score. So that essentially will be saying you are going to implement something or you are not going to implement something based on the scores that you have calculated. Okay, so I've got a diagram here, and the problem, like I said, is at the center. So at the center that says upgrade the factory with new manufacturing machinery. So the question is, should we upgrade the factory with new manufacturing machinery? And you'll see on the left hand side you have forces for the change, which is indicating that everything on the left hand side of the problem in the middle is reasons as to why we should implement a factory upgrade. The forces against are on the right hand side, and those are all the reasons as to why we should not have a factory upgrade. So if we look at that quickly, we'll see the forces for are customers want new products, and people and the person that or people that are involved in this problem solving technique felt that this had a 4 rating, so it was quite a strong force to motivate that we should upgrade the factory. The second positive was improve the speed of production, and they felt that that had a 2 rating. The increase in the volumes of output had a 3 rating, and the maintenance cost increasing had a 1 rating. So if we add all that together, the 4 plus the 2 plus the 3 plus the 1, we get a total of 10. So in this case, the forces for equaled a value of 10. On the right hand side, we have the forces against, and if you see all the scores that have been allocated there, you'll see it's 3, 3, 1, 3, 1. If you add all of that together, you get a total of 11. So in this case, you'll see your forces in favor of upgrading the factory or manufacturing machinery equal 10, your forces against equal 11. So your decision in this case would be not to upgrade the factory, because your forces against upgrading your factory outweigh your forces for upgrading the factory. Okay, so when it comes to application of this work, grade 12s, you want to make sure that you have a diagram similar to this. It doesn't have to be exactly like this, but you need to have a diagram where you have your problem at the center, you have your forces for the change on the one side with the ratings, you have the forces against the change on the other side with the ratings, and then at the bottom you have your score added up. So you must have a total score for your forces for the change, your total score for the forces against the change, and then you must indicate the decision that is being made. So in this case, the decision was we will not upgrade the factory with new manufacturing machinery. Why? Because the forces against outweigh the forces for. Okay, so that would be the implementation of the force field analysis. Like I said, your diagram doesn't have to be exactly like that, but you must have the basic information of the problem in the middle, forces for on the one side with the rating, forces against on the other side with the rating, a total on each side, and then a decision that gets implemented based on the scores. Okay.
So, if I can just add something there, with my grade 12, so we often have a good discussion with regards to the force field analysis, because they can use it for any sort of decision or that they're looking to make. So, for example, in class we often refer to what are they going to do next year. So maybe they're looking at going to a particular university. So they're looking to go to a university up in Johannesburg. So then you'll start to think, okay, well, I can do this for myself to decide whether I would go with a decision like that or not. And what's really nice is that you get a quantifiable result. So there's no way to argue in this situation that we have got in front of us. If you can just go back to that diagram, there's no arguing that the forces against outweigh the forces for the change. So straight away you can identify that that's the best route to take. So it's something that you can use yourself when you may be struggling to make a decision in your situation.
Especially if you have a group that's divided on something.
For sure.
So like you said, use some examples. I use an example as well where I just randomly made up a question and said, should we continue homeschooling or continuing online schooling instead of coming to school? And I asked the kids in the class, I said, what do you think are the advantages of working from home? What are the disadvantages? And then I created a spreadsheet and I asked each person to give their own rating. And I made an average. I took an average for each of the items, put it on the force field analysis grid, and it turns out that the decision, if the class had to make the decision, would be to attend the actual physical school.
Okay,
and
interesting.
It's a nice thing to say, look, you all had input. It was a democratic process, so it's fair. So like you said, it's a fair process because we were all democratically involved. We had equal weighting. So to say, each one, there was no one person that was more important than the other one. The averages spoke. And it was a democratic process, so no one complains if a decision is made that way. So there's less resistance as well when you're using a technique like this with a group of people.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So many ways to use the Delphi technique. Very good example, but it can be time consuming as well. So it depends on your problem that you are trying to solve. Okay, let's look at the benefits of creative thinking in the workplace. All right, so many benefits. The first benefit of creative thinking is you come up with better ideas or better solutions to problems. Okay, you're not using the same old problem-solving techniques, which results in the problem reoccurring all the time. You get better problems, so you have solutions that last a lot longer, or they don't create other problems because of the creative thinking process. Okay, the next one would be there is a competitive advantage. So if you come up with new ideas, it means that you are creating something that other businesses haven't done yet. Okay, so you're going to give your customers a product that's more unique, and that might be a factor in convincing a customer to come to your store instead of another store to purchase the product or service that you are offering. Okay, the next benefit we're looking at is that it solves complex problems. Okay, there are a number of problem-solving techniques that we have looked at, and each one has its advantages and disadvantages, and selecting the appropriate one will allow you to solve difficult problems. Okay, so that's one of the benefits of problem solving in the workplace or creative thinking in the workplace is you are able to solve difficult or complex problems. All right, it increases productivity because when we are more creative, we think of better ways of doing things, which results in our productivity increasing. Right? With an increase in products, with a competitive advantage, with the ability to solve complex problems, we are able to then increase our profits in the business as well. Okay, all because of the creative thinking process. And then lastly, managers become better leaders. Okay, when you are a creative manager, you are able to find better ways of leading your team that you have with you. You're going to have a happier, more productive team. So you then in yourself become a better leader because you are improving your skills as a manager and as a leader in the workplace. Okay, grade 12s, we're going to move on to some consolidation activities in the last 10 minutes or so that we have available to you. So this is in the last back of your booklets, the last few questions. And again, we're going to encourage you to look at the mark allocation to help you identify how to answer these questions. Mr. Edwards, would you mind taking us through the first few questions?
Yeah, sure. So the first one, it says, read the scenario above and answer the questions that follow. All right, so as we referred to earlier, with these problem-solving techniques, this is often a way that the question is asked. So let's have a look at the scenario itself. Okay, it says, the management of Jacob Constructions wants to change the structure of their business. Okay, so there's a couple of clues there already. They asked employees to evaluate the advantages and disadvantages of the proposed change. Also, a couple of clues there. Employees were encouraged to apply creative thinking skills when discussing the change. So the question is, identify the problem-solving technique applied by JC. Motivate your answer by quoting from the scenario above. Very popular question with this section of work. Right, so the answer that we have is the force field analysis. So for that answer, you would get your 2 marks allocated to identifying which technique has been used. All right, so we've identified the force field analysis because, and here's the quote, they asked employees to evaluate the advantages and disadvantages of the proposed change. Okay, so that was the main aspect that you needed to look out for, the advantages and disadvantages.
Mr. Edwards, I just want to emphasize again the importance of getting that first question right. So like we said, you must identify the technique, the problem-solving technique with the keywords, because often there are follow-up questions.
Yeah.
And if you get the technique wrong, you're going to not be able to answer the follow-up question. So not only are you going to get the first 3 marks wrong, but if there is a follow-up question like evaluate the impact of the technique you identified for 8 or 6 to 8 marks, you're also going to lose that marks.
Yeah.
So it's very important, grade 12s, to make sure that you are able to easily identify the difference between specifically the Delphi technique, the nominal group technique, and the force field analysis. And I think we've explained in depth today how you can easily identify that. Okay, back to you.
All right. The next question we're going to look at, again, looking at a scenario over there. Okay, the 1.2 is explain the advantages of creative thinking in the workplace. Now, we referred to that earlier in a couple of slides ago. Let's look at the options available. All right, so the key that they've indicated here is the verb explain. All right, so that means that you're going to have a statement and then a qualifier, something that's asking, or the question who, what, why. All right, note the mark allocation says 4 marks. All right, so you should be able to identify by now, if it's 4 marks, it means that you've got basically 2 bullets that you need to complete. Right, so let's have a look at the possible answers that have been provided. The first one, it says better, unique, unconventional ideas or solutions. Okay, that's where you get your first mark. And the second mark would be are generated. All right, and then moving on to the next one, may give the business a competitive advantage. Okay, how? If unusual, unique solutions are implemented. So there's a great example of the statement and then the qualifier. The statement being may give the business a competitive advantage, and then the qualifier, you ask the question why, if or how, if unusual solutions have been implemented. All right, moving on to the bullet number 3, complex business problems may be solved. And then number 4, productivity increases as management may quickly generate multiple ideas. Which utilizes time and money more effectively. Note that we're going through all the possible examples of advantages or benefits that you may have available to you, but you would have only needed to provide 2 of those bullets in this situation. All right, handing over back to Mr. de Klerk
Right,
for
the
the
last
essay
thing we're going to look at today, grade 12s, is the essay type questions. So we're not going to give you all the answers and the mark allocations here. What we're going to focus on is the technique, just to remind you again about what the basics are that you have in your essay or that you need in your essay question. Okay, so there will always be a leading statement like we have there in the table, where it says the management of Mojo Paints wants to improve the quality of their paints because of various complaints from their customers. They have requested employees to generate new creative ideas on how to improve their productivity to satisfy customers' needs. Refer to the scenario above and write an essay in which you include the following aspects. Distinguish the difference between decision making and problem solving. Explain how Mojo Paints can apply the Delphi and nominal group techniques to solve their business problems. Discuss the advantages of creative thinking. And lastly, recommend practical ways in which Mojo Paints may create an environment that stimulates creative thinking. So the first thing I want you to look at here is the verbs. Okay, so if you look at the first one there, distinguish between decision making and problem solving. So there you are going to basically differentiate between the 2 concepts. Okay, so when it looks at in terms of mark allocation and how much facts you need there, normally decision making will be worth at most about 4 marks. Problem solving will be worth at most about 4 marks. So for that first bullet point, it will most likely be about 8 marks for that. Okay, so you're not going to write down too much information with regards to that because you are only explaining the difference between 2 concepts. Okay, and that mark will most likely be split there as well. So you're going to have a statement and a qualifier to get the 2 marks there. The second bullet point, the action verb there is explain. So again, those marks will be split, but it will be a good idea to use subheadings there as well when you're differentiating between the Delphi technique and the nominal group technique, and I'll show you that format in a minute or 2. The third one will be discuss the advantages of creative thinking. So that verb discuss again will be an indication that the marks will be split. And the last one there, recommend a practical way. So that recommend verb there that's been used will be an indication that the marks will be 2 marks awarded for 1 statement at the end. So you don't need a qualifier and a statement and a qualifier there. Just your statement will be worth 2 marks. Okay, so just to show you the format of how you should be writing your essay, you have your introduction, which has 2 bullet points attached to it. Now, your introduction as well as your conclusion cannot contain any information that is in that statement that's been given there in the table. Okay, so a lot of time we see that learners write or rewrite sentences from the leading statement that's done or the scenario that's been given to you. Or often you say things like, in this essay, I will be discussing the following. That is not how an introduction works in business studies. Okay, so your introduction has to be actual facts about something that you're going to be talking about in the essay, and it's going to be 2 bullet points, which means you need 2 statements for that. Then each of the bullet points that are in the question that you see there have to be their own heading in the body of the essay. So you will actually write that down, underline it to show that that is your heading, and then put your information below that so that the person marking it can clearly see that you are putting in your body in those bullet points there. And then finally, your conclusion would be 1 statement at the end, but you cannot repeat any facts that you have repeated in the body of the essay. So there's a basic breakdown, and on the side you'll see the flasso that we use when we mark these essays. So that's just a basic reminder and a basic structure of the essay. Okay, grade 12s, that brings us to the end of our session today. Thank you, Mr. Edwards, for your insight.
Yeah,
I'm sure that the grade 12s would have had a productive session with us today. So thank you very much, grade 12s. Good luck as you go forward for the remainder of the year, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
All the best.